Kevin, thank you so much for joining me on this discussion of installment sale trusts. And I know you're a little bit of a specialist in this area. Can you give me some background as to your experience and how you came to master this particular discipline?
I've run a lot of businesses over the years, and when I came into this industry, I immediately gravitated to other business owners as people to do business with, and the people you associate with and are comfortable with. And their attitude was, well, you can make the same, 9, 10, 11% my guys averaging, take over the accounts, that's fine. Where I need some help is I'm trying to sell this business and I got this big tax bill and it's almost not worth selling it after I've got to pay the tax. And one of my friends said, hey, I got this apartment building and I don't want to do a REIT or a DST, but I don't want to deal with this building anymore. But if I sell it, I'm gonna get this tax hit. I heard about this trust thing. And here's kind of how I remember it worked. I can't find the stuff on it. If you can find that, I'll do it with you. So I hit Google and started searching. And I found it. And the first guy I found was in Ohio. And he was a retired CPA from Ernst & Young. But he was doing charitable remainder trusts and all kinds of stuff like that. And he'd retained a lot of his clients from Ernst & Young when he retired. And he got me started with it. And then through him, I met a local firm that has a knockoff program of the old Ernst & Young program, the Installment Sale Trust program. But I had problems there because they didn't have the protections and the no protections and the trust for the client that we wanted. We had to argue with them about it all the time. They didn't want to give those protections because that holds the trustee accountable. And they don't want to be held accountable. They want to do what they want to do, So we finally set up our own trustee service and put all the things in the note that they can have, all the things in the trust that they can have for their protections, things their attorneys and CPAs don't even know to ask for, but we know because we do this, right? But that's how the whole thing started and evolved. It was literally a friend of mine had this apartment building. He was just sick of dealing with it, but he didn't want to pay the tax and he'd heard about this years earlier. Okay. And I hit Google and then I narrowed it down and this guy in Ohio, John, his name came up. So I called him and he's one of those old school guys that if you ask a question, he likes to teach, because he's already made his nut. So he's good, so he likes to teach and mentor and he mentored me an awful lot. He's not well now, so he's not actually working anymore. But I had to evolve through a couple of different trustee services. At one point,
so there's
we tried
some
to use
difficulty in finding people to work with on these techniques.
Yeah, because everybody wants to put fingers in the pie.
Okay, so they can get expensive.
Yes, they
and
can.
Maybe that's why people don't want to do REITs, which I believe is a real estate investment trust.
Yeah.
Or what's that other thing you were talking about?
DST?
The DST. Yes, I've heard of those too. What are those?
Well, there's a Delaware Statutory Trust, and that's kind of like a REIT. It's a form of a REIT. It functions much like a REIT. Those can be unpredictable though, because you could get a short-term notice that everybody's getting out. And now you got to get out and find something else to go to or pay the tax. And they oftentimes don't pay all that well. The rate of return's not that well. And then there's another thing that's called a DST. That's a knockoff of the Ernst & Young program. And that's a deferred sale trust. And that's a name they made up. And because they didn't want to use installment sale trust because they didn't want to be connected to where their lawyer used to work. So,
that's funny that you say that because I pulled up a Google list of installment sale trusts and DSTs, and there are literally hundreds of links. I'm just going through them and they all look like they say exactly the same thing, but these are clearly very different tools. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that the REITs and the Delaware statutory trusts are like multiple products, multiple owners, but the installment sale trust is not. It's something that's more tailored to individuals.
Yeah, in an installment sale trust, you can negotiate with the trustee what the terms of your note are.
Okay.
If you'd have told me in 2004 that almost a third of the clients would say, I don't want any income right now. I don't want to pay tax on it. Just let it grow in the trust. I want income in 5 years because that's when the wife and I are retiring from whatever. I wouldn't have believed it. We have people now that say, I don't want any income for the next 10 years because I don't want to pay the tax.
Oh, that's very interesting. So
I
you
don't
can
need
really
it for
control
my
the
day-to-day
income stream.
life, and I don't want to pay the tax now, let it grow. Because that's what you do in a retirement account. You don't pull it out until you need it, you let it grow, right?
Mhm.
I never would have guessed as many people do that and just let it grow in the trust for a while, then take it out later. You can't go past 10 years. There's no hard and fast rule. You gotta look at how the IRS interprets things over time, because it's not like it's written in the tax code exactly that. So you have to go back and do the homework. Well, we do that for you. We've already done all that, and know what they like and what they don't like.
And if I
And
remember correctly from my homework, that is the IRC 453 for installment sales. And I have
yeah,
referenced publication 537 as the guidebook that the IRS hands out that explains all of this stuff. And what you're saying is the IST, you guys and your trustees have done all of this homework already.
yes, and I've spent a lot of late nights. In fact, the one librarian at the law library here at Chapman University, I live right behind Chapman University in Orange County, in Old Town Orange.
Oh, that's a beautiful area.
It's beautiful here. No, I spent so much time down there. At one point, the librarian would yell over to me, "You're the last person here. Make sure the door locks behind you." And she'd leave. And then if I didn't move around, the lights would start shutting off because they're motion sensitive, So I'd have to wave my hand so the light would come back on while I'm reading. And she'd just leave me in there with a cup of coffee till 2:30 in the morning. So if you read that IRS publication and you read IRC 453, the Internal Revenue Code 453, and you say, okay, I've read all that, I'm going to do all of that, you may or may not actually pass the audit. See, it's more gray than that. So you got to look at the tax court rulings. How have they interpreted those in specific situations? Because remember, when the auditor shows up, his job's to collect something to look good to his boss. So he's going to pick at it until he can find a hole and then dig at the hole, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's things that they just don't like. Now, in truth, what are they trying to look for? People that are trying to game the system, right? So if you're not gaming the system and there's arm's length in the transaction, and this is what they would call a viable business transaction, something that would be done either way by two parties, then they don't mind the tax deferral. IRS doesn't mind tax deferral. There's tax deferral in every appreciated asset out there. Mm-hmm. That apartment building before you sold it had 30 years worth of tax deferral in there, right? Because it had appreciated. It's just the tax comes due when there's something that triggers it. So they don't mind the tax deferral. They just don't want them in the system. Even if you follow the rules, but you're clearly just gaming the system, they don't like that. So what have we done? We've just read through 85 years, I think, of tax court rulings of, in this situation, what was the interpretation of the ruling? In this situation, what was the interpretation of the ruling? And those aren't hard and fast rules. Like you might have an audit and maybe you didn't really follow this, but they see that it's just that you're just taking income over time. It's obviously was part of your estate plan why you did it. Well, then they're okay with it. Like technically a father selling to a son a business or selling to his child a business and carrying back the note. Well, that's not an arm's length transaction.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I was thumbing through that publication, publication 537, and there is a laundry list of related party transactions that are not approved for this type of structure. And I think that's one of them. Is there's like literally 15 or 20 different scenarios that you have to not trigger. So when you say, there's if it passes a business purpose rather than being something that's held for a family or, being exchanged by closely held interests, I think that's probably one of the key features to keeping this legitimate.
There are times at the IRS, I asked some IRS auditors that we communicate on their Gmail and my personal email. We ask each other questions. We met through an audit, and which we passed flying colors. Mm-hmm. But he said, can I stay in communication with you and just be somebody I ask questions of, and maybe you do the same with me? He goes, so we can just share best practices. Because you seem like somebody that's just more interested in doing it right. And I said, yeah, in fact, as an auditor, you were very fair. And I would enjoy that. And that's developed into a bit of a relationship. And he'll go months and then he'll ask me 3 questions in a week, right? And then I'll ask him questions. I asked him, why don't you guys, when a parent sells to a child, that doesn't meet the installment sale. I mean, that's not an arm's length transaction. And he said, yeah, we've discussed that. Imagine the negative press we would get if every time a son decides to buy the business from the father, we audit to them and tax the dad for the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, yeah, that's negative publicity we just don't want. So yeah, we let it go.
That's interesting, because that is a specific line item under the related party exclusions.
But they let it go.
That are not allowed specifically by law, but it's just something they don't approach. So that's real interesting.
They basically just let it go.
Mhm.
Now, if they saw some funny business going on, some tax evasion by doing this or something, if you were doing something else, if they picked up on 2 or 3 other things you were doing, they're not going to let it go. But he literally said, it's just imagine the negative press we would get when some family business is trying to go to the next generation, and dad carried the note. Yeah, we don't need that negative press. So what can you infer from what he said? And that is, they want to be fair and reasonable. And yeah, technically that doesn't qualify, but this was an obvious, just family generational business buying out the parent over time. They're not going to pick that apart. They're not as heartless as you think most of the time. They really aren't. Now you'll get individual auditors that are just, Satan's brother-in-law, but then you'll get others that are fair about it. Yeah, okay, I could ding you on that, but I can see what you're doing here, and he's paying tax on the income when he gets the payment every month, and it's a reasonable thing that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And they have it within their discretion to say that this is just normal, ordinary, reasonable business, and the taxes are being paid as he gets the check every month, and so they have discretion to let those things go. When it's something that's just reasonable and ordinary course of business. So that's what we want to look at when we're doing these transactions. Can we structure the deal in a custom way for you based on your needs? Yes, but we have to make sure everything we do is something that's reasonable, ordinary, customary course of business. Something that would be done whether or not there was a note involved. It would be a normal, ordinary way of doing things. For example, let's say you wanted a preferred relationship and you say, I'm just going to do the note for 1%. Well, that's not a normal, ordinary course of business. That's not a viable business transaction that would be available outside of a bank that's subsidizing your Toyota that you bought at 1% or something, right? Because they're getting rebates from Toyota for doing it. So that would never be a note that would be sold anywhere. So they're going to ding you on that. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, if you just plan on taking a really high rate of return and bleeding down the trust really fast and getting a short-term deferral, they could do the same thing. So let's say I'm going to put all the money in the trust and I want you to pay me 18% interest only, and I'm just going to bleed the thing down, right? Well, that wouldn't be normal and ordinary either. So just think it has to be something that would be viable regardless of the trust between the two parties.
Okay.
Even if the trust wasn't
really
there,
get
it
too
would be
creative
viable.
with it. Well, when you're going through the interpretations of what an installment sale works and what a trust works for these particular transactions, it's really, there's enough nuance with what has been challenged in the past successfully that you pretty much have to rely on professional advice, is what I'm getting at. Can't get too creative with it.
Yeah, and just rely on us, because we've stayed up nights reading all that boring stuff. I don't find it boring. I try to talk to people about it. They glaze over pretty quick. So, but I enjoy it. I think
let's hit on that boring a little bit more, because one of the things I picked up on was there's different types of installments and there's different types of trusts. So I was wondering if you could explain to me the difference between a monetized installment sale and a structured installment sale.
Oh.
And then if we could talk the differences between an irrevocable trust and a business trust. Okay. Just like layman's terms, because I think those are the key differences that aren't really explained when somebody does a Google search. And that seems to be a pretty critical difference from what I'm hearing with what you're doing.
Well, technically under the tax law, you could actually, let me handle this simple one first. Then I'll get into the negative one, the monetized installment sale. I'll get into that later. Technically, you could use a limited liability company, have a note to the LLC sells it to the final person, have the money come back to the LLC, rather than using the installment sale trust.
Okay.
That would meet the legal definition. It's just the manager and owner of the LLC wouldn't be a trustee, wouldn't have certain fiduciary responsibilities. And the person holding the note against the assets of the LLC wouldn't have all the same protections. It would pass the tax code, the audit, but why would you want a note against that when you would have far less protections that way?
Yeah, that's also in that publication 537, where they say related party transactions that are disallowed. They're spelling out corporations to corporations, trustees to corporations. So the LLC, they're not saying that they can't do that. It looked like they were only saying that, hey, if you own your own trust and you own an LLC and you try to do installments between the two, then that gets disallowed.
So you can't do it your own
trust
LLC.
version works as long as it's structured correctly.
Use a business purpose trust, which has been around since the 19th century. And a business purpose trust has the protections of a trust. It has owners. It doesn't have beneficiaries. For example, credit unions are a business purpose trust that's been granted banking and nonprofit status and all those kinds of things. And they have a board of trustees.
Wow. Okay.
And they have a board of trustees rather than one trustee.
They do.
So, an attorney explained that to me one day. I was like, oh, that's cool. So we use a business purpose trust because that gives the note holder more protections, because now that trust has to function as a trust, has to function under fiduciary standards. It has to have a trustee and all those things that give them more protections, even though they have collateralized the assets of the trust that they sold to it in exchange for that note they took, right? But we use a business purpose trust, but we also use a different operating agreement inside the trust than some of the other copycats use. We don't mind writing the things in there to protect that note holder.
Oh, okay.
Because we don't plan on doing any funny business. So every one of the competitors out there doesn't give the protections we give because they want the option to do some other things if they should desire to do so. And they won't tell you those things are even available to you because they don't want their hands tied down. We don't mind because we have a standard business model that's all just written into our business model. We've already planned for that. So using a business purpose trust, and it's my understanding, I think a business purpose trust can only go 21 years, but you can renew it. Now we renew every 10 because we do a 10-year note. So then you can settle up and roll over for another 10 years because the trust has grown.
Why the irrevocable trusts,
an irrevocable trust triggers
party issues and tend to have problems.
Yes. So ours is a revocable trust because you want the option to do those things if you need to. If it's irrevocable, that triggers all kinds of other problems. Yeah. All right. And you don't want that. You don't want all the other problems that can trigger. And then the trust sells the asset to the final buyer. Cash comes back to the trust that's invested, generates income. But by using that structure, that gives the note holder all the protections they would ever need. Plus, we write terms into the note to where they have dual signature. It's like DACA agreement. It's the same as DACA without the complexity of it. But they have dual signature on all the assets and all the accounts that the trust holds. So nobody can run away with their asset, the collateral for their note. Okay.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but there has to be arm's length. They can't be related parties. So we're providing that service. We're providing a service that is effectively providing you arm's length and all those other things to tick all those boxes. Now, the monetized installment sale. There's a guy up in Idaho that took a letter from the IRS out of context and saying, this is allowed. You can take this note and monetize it, sell it to somebody in exchange for cash, right? Mm-hmm. You can only do that in the tax code for farmland, a family farm, things related to agriculture. It has to be an agricultural thing. And that was excluded in the tax rules for very specific reasons for how farms and stuff function.
Interesting. That's what they
took that out of context.
If I remember correctly.
It was what?
That's what they call the pledge rule in the IRS publication. And that,
Yeah, I
that
believe
seems
so.
like
Yeah.
it's layering loans, like an installment note is a loan.
Yeah.
It's a carry back.
Yeah.
And if I read that and understood it correctly, you can't layer those unless it's a
No.
farm property. And that's a hard line that the IRS has taken. And I think Forbes actually wrote an article on that in just 2019
They
about these
did.
transactions.
And there was even an appeal of those because the guy was fighting it to the Ninth Circuit Court, and they just stepped on him that no, it's not allowed.
Interesting.
And that is that money that person received against that note is constructive receipt, and it's taxable. Because there's only one exception, and that's for agricultural, farmland, ag-related transactions, because the nature of farming and how those things work.
Mhm.
So people could sell the family farm to, the company offering that service took a letter from the IRS referencing that and took it out of context and just kind of left that little detail about the farm thing out. And now they've got several thousand clients all being audited. So that's the risk you run in these things. Is it sounds good, they show you the tax code, they kind of leave that little detail out, right?
Uh-huh.
Would have been
So is
nice
that
to
a
know
too
that.
good to be true scenario? Because walk me through that. If I understand that correctly, what they were doing that the IRS did not like is they were setting up an installment sale and then borrowing all the money back, so that effectively they would sell, defer all the tax, but then have full and free use of the money right after the sale. And
Yes.
that violates the pledge rule, and that's crossing the line. That's where you don't
Exactly.
actually have an installment sale. So that's completely understandable, right?
They were not even in a gray area. They were way over the line. I
Okay.
mean,
Because it sounds
yeah,
pretty complex with all the terms that we throw around, but that's obviously they're abusing the structure.
exactly.
And okay, so that's obvious. Yeah,
But that happens in all kinds of things. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the structure. It just means they abuse something. So, there's just because there's a few drunk drivers doesn't mean you don't want to drive car.
yeah.
Okay.
Good analogy.
So it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with driving a car or being out on the road because there's occasional drunk driver. So the structure's fine. Just don't cross these lines. And that's what they were doing. And why were they doing it? Because they made a quick 8, 9, 10% commission, because you got 90 to 92% of the money right back on the note. So it was $1 million note. You got,
Yeah.
$920,000.
People had to know they were skirting the law. I mean, I don't know how you could do a situation like that and not kind of figure something was off. But so
Well,
how would somebody
greed
protect
is
themselves with an installment sale?
greed clouds judgment. So that's what happened there.
So I think, you have the dual signatures, you have an arm's length transaction.
Yeah.
Is there any other ways that you know of that an investor that was interested in installment trust could protect themselves when they explored these as an option?
You can go as far as you file UCC ones against all the assets of the trust to further protect those as collateral for your note. Now that makes your transaction public, because those get recorded with the Secretary of State. And some people with privacy, don't want that public. Something else, but you can do that. You can, even with the different contracts and investments inside the trust, file with the firms that this is collateral for something, for the note. So there's a whole series of things you can do there. There are fidelity bonds that can be purchased. If you like, they're not overly expensive, because the nature of our trust structure is so transparent and simple. The underwriters for those fidelity bonds don't charge much in premium for that. We've had people entertain that, and then once they go through our entire trust structure, they think, "Oh, I don't need that." I've had a couple of people file UCC ones over the years on some of the assets for protections, and they usually don't renew them. Because after they've done business for a while, because you have to renew those every so many years, they don't renew them. So there's there's a series of things you can do to give yourself protections. Having the dual signature, the transparency and everything on all the sub accounts, most people, that's completely all they need to make them feel comfortable that nobody's going to steal their money. Nobody's going to made off your money. So
I think we've covered all the risks of the installment trust. Can you run through why somebody would want to do this? Like, what are the benefits of it?
you get to earn a return on all the money, not just the after-tax portion. And if you're in a high tax state, or you have, let's say you're selling a business and you've taken accelerated depreciation on stuff, between the gains tax on, on everything over basis, plus some of the accelerated depreciation you could recover all at once, you can lose 41-42% of a transaction. You can sell a business for.
So if I had a $10 million business, I could literally walk away with what, 600,000 if I don't do any planning?
Yeah, $1 million business, you can walk away with $600,000 and that's it. So between the state, the feds, and just and recovering some accelerated depreciation and a whole series of other things. Now we engineer the sale to the trust and then the sale from the trust to the final buyer and the cash coming back to mitigate a lot of that recovery of accelerated depreciation. We can't get rid of all of it, but we can get rid of most of it. And then all the other just standard gains tax on the gains, we defer that. And then people say, deferred until when? Until the day after never, if you don't want to pull the principal out and just keep earning interest on it forever, because it grows. The trust grows in value over time, over and above the interest being paid to you. And your payments can go up over time. So it's do you want 600,000 today, or do you want income which totals millions for generations?
Oh, see, that's well worth discussing. Boy, that's a different one.
Yeah.
That's like, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of those people that win the lottery, and you see them on the news, and they win like $20 million, and 3 years later they're broke. Or like MC Hammer, right?
There you go.
MC Hammer got paid, and then he was bankrupt 2 years later. So you're saying this is a way to and I get maybe some people might not like to get a payment over time. They might want to have full and free use of the money immediately. But if you don't want to actually care about it and you want to live life, boy, that would be nice. I mean, sign me up for a check that I don't have to worry about. What else?
There are a lot of people that would just rather pay the tax and or cheat. They usually don't pay the tax, they cheat on it and hope they don't get caught.
Yeah.
And they want free use of the money, and they think somehow they're better off. And I've circled back to some of those people, and one of them was an apartment building, and he just paid the tax, and he had one more rental. And it was about 6 years after that, he just paid the tax, coming back and says, I don't think I want to do that again. I think I want to do this IST thing this time. He didn't have any of the money from the sale of this fourplex left.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like the more money you have in your pocket, the more inclined you are to burn through it.
He never put it quite this way, but in a couple of conversations we had, I kind of got the feeling that, they had that lump sum of money. They set aside the money for the tax. Thank God, so they didn't get in trouble there. And then, all right, we're going to go ahead and spend some money in this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we'll just make up for it later. And you go down that rabbit hole very far, and pretty soon you're in trouble. So the next rental, they were selling it because they needed to sell it, because all that other money was gone. Because, his kid needed some help with something, and the other one, needed this, and it doesn't take long and it's gone, right? Mm-hmm. And they had other income. He had a pension from a job that he had, but it wasn't high. And tell you what, the second time around, they put it in the trust, took the income stream and lived on a budget. And now they're not going to outlive their money. And the assets in the trust do appreciate over time. So you get step ups in income over time. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's just that one payment forever. It keeps going up. And as long as you just pull the interest and don't touch the principal and let it grow, it'll grow over time. So it's long-term a much wiser thing to do. And then I run into people that say, no, just even after tax, I can do better with the money on my own than I can without you. So how much faster do you have to run when I get to start the race 40% closer to the finish line.
That's great because they're already paying the tax. They have less to work with.
You're not going to live long enough to make up that difference. And then what's going to happen? So, unless you just happen to buy Bitcoin at $100 a coin, back in the day, or you bought Apple or Tesla at just the right time, can you beat us? Yeah. But that requires some foreknowledge or some luck or some insider trading. So, it's just, and should you be buying those kinds of investments with this money? I mean, there's money that's meant to last for your lifetime, and there's money that you take risk with. So the only way you're going to beat us is if you took risks you shouldn't have taken in the first place and you got lucky that it didn't backfire on you. And a lot of that is market timing. And that you can't control. The market's going to do what the market's going to do. And if you decided to jump into an investment real estate in 2006, went out and bought 5 houses, you don't own any of them today, right? Right? They were all upside down. The rents weren't covering the payments, and you were stuck, right?
Yep.
So that you can't control. That's going to happen external, and that's one of the things our model protects against. So this isn't money that you should be doing those things anyway. So anything that you would have to do to outperform us is something you shouldn't be doing with this money anyway. This isn't that money. You don't take your savings account to Vegas. You take your fund money to Vegas, and when it's gone. You come home, right?
That's a great way to put it.
You see, so, and the odds of you beating us over time, because we started so much farther ahead, and we're getting compounding on top of that. It's really difficult to do because you're going to have to take more risk, which means you'll have more volatility. With more risk always comes more volatility. And then it's a sequence of returns. What did the market do and when did it do it in whatever market you chose to be in? And will it outpace us? It probably won't. And here's the other question. When you pass away, let's say we're talking investment real estate. The Apartment Owners Association did a study in 2006. 1 in 5 rental properties makes it to the next generation.
That's it? 1 in 5?
1 in 5. Here's why they don't make it. Now, mom and dad hold on to that thing and they suck it up and they put up with bad tenants and they clean the carpets themselves and they learn how to patch holes with toothpaste and touch it up and everything else, right? And they learn how to do all those things. They learn how to use the baking soda vinegar to clean that stove because nobody's cleaned it in a year. And they learn all those techniques to refresh that apartment for the next tenant, and they just suck it up because they want the kids to inherit that property, right? The property's not going to make it for 4 out of 5 reasons, and they're all beyond your control. And here's what they are. Dad's in a home, doesn't know the day of the week. Mom sells it early to pay for his care. Dad died, because the man usually dies first, right? Mm-hmm. So dad died, mom doesn't want to be a landlord. If they owned it correctly, she got to step up in basis on half, but still had to pay tax on the other half. She's probably not going to get a step up in basis on all of it because they usually don't own it correctly to do that. There's a way to do that, but they usually don't own it correctly to do that. Either way, it gets sold early because mom doesn't want to be a landlord. Or dad's gone, mom's in a home, the kids sell it early to take care of mom. Or dad's gone, mom's gone, kids sell it early and divide the money. And then it's all gone.
What's amazing is you don't know this, but my father actually inherited a vacation lodge outside of Lake Cumberland from his father, who was a World War II vet. And that was his post-World War II job, was managing a vacation lodge. And my father was set to inherit that. And then he got sent off to Vietnam. And, same deal. We never could keep that in the family because grandfather died and grandmother could not run the lodge by herself. And my pops was in Vietnam at the time. So, but I never put that together the way that you did. But that seems like that is absolutely the case. It just doesn't stay in the family very easily.
The 1 in 5 that do make it to the next generation, 50% of those are only children, only child.
Ah. So this really is like a flavor of legacy planning. You get more just by deferring the tax. you're starting off ahead of the game.
You've created something that now you write it into your will that the kids can't take the principal, they just have to take the income. So now your unwashed, ungrateful children will at least only be able to spend the income and something goes to the grandchildren, because the grandchildren are always perfect, right?
Yep.
So the number of parents I've had that want to leave nothing to the kids, but everything to their grandkids, they love the grandkids.
Yeah.
So, isn't that funny how that goes, right? The grandkids can do no wrong. So you write it in your will that they can't touch the principal, they can only take the income, and then you've created generational income. But here's something else we can provide. A lot of folks don't know this is banks like to buy life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dave Ramsey says all kinds of stuff about life insurance that he knows isn't true, so he lies. Susie Orman said things about life insurance that she knows isn't true. She lies. How do I know? Her ex-wife is a client of mine. All right.
Oh, goodness.
Susie Orman has millions and millions of dollars sitting in cash value insurance contracts.
Media spokesperson, they have a message that they represent.
Yeah. So properly owned and properly funded insurance contract is a very profitable investment. It's a great tax shelter and generates excellent income. Now, the odds of finding an advisor who knows how to structure one of those, because each policy is written as a bespoke contract. Each one's designed individually. Mm-hmm. It's not just fill out the forms. I want this much death benefit. Here's the premium. Go. It doesn't work that way. These are bespoke design contracts. We have banks that send me emails every Monday asking me for applications. They want to fund the contract. Here's why. They get the money from the Fed for less than 1% right now. Mm-hmm. They put it in the policy and charge 2.5%, but the policies, the good ones, earn 6, 7, 8% compounding every year in dividends, tax-free.
Okay.
You get the death benefit and get to keep the spread between the 2.5 and the 6.
Oh, so you're getting, like in that example, you're getting to keep 5 along with the death benefit. You keep 5%.
Yes. So you just let it grow. We buy these in every one of the trusts we can buy it on. And even if you think, oh, I'm 80 years old, I'm uninsurable, you'd be shocked. You're not uninsurable.
Yeah, I was going to say, why wouldn't somebody do that?
We put this on top here. So here's the thing. They say, well, I got to hold on to that apartment building because I want to step up in basis. They're holding on for that. Well, Congress is trying to take that away.
Right there. Okay.
I can give you twice the step up in basis through the insurance contract and more income from the trust and no longer have any tenants and toilets.
Wow, you just blew my mind. I mean, there is so much in here that people just, it is unbelievable to me. That just literally you blew my mind, Kevin.
$1 million into the trust that you would have only netted maybe 700 from if you're lucky after taxes, right? Or you would have had to done a 1031 exchange of some REIT and then find out that it's being mismanaged and you lost money in the thing. That happens all the time. And you can't get out, right? So, or huge redemption fees to get out. Instead of doing any of that, you sell it to the Installment Sale Trust. You get income on all the money. The trust generates more income than the property because the trust has 1/3 the expenses of a property. Mm-hmm. We don't have all the expenses of an investment property. The expenses are less. That's why it generates more income. Plus you're earning on all the value, not just what average rents are for the area. So now you're getting income on all of it. Plus I have a bank that looks at that trust and says, there's $1 million in there. We'll give you a $2 million death benefit in a cash value contract. So now your heirs inherit the trust, the $1 million or whatever it's grown to, the income from the trust, and $2 million tax-free from an insurance contract.
Yeah, it's obviously that's a no-brainer.
You can't get all that from keeping the apartment building.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not knocking real estate. You would not have had that $1 million to start our process with had you not bought that building and sucked it up for 20 or more years, right? And been a good landlord. So it's a way of locking in your gains now and solving a lot of estate planning problems and all the other things that happen later in life, like when you're in a home for 10 years and don't know the day of the week. I have a great aunt, my dad's mother's sister, my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, who was much younger. My great-grandfather married somebody the age of his daughters after his wife died. He was a widower and he married this really young woman and had a few more kids. So I have these great aunts who are the same age as my father. So he actually has one aunt that he calls her aunt. It irritates her. Well, it doesn't now, because they're all in their 90s, but because she was 2 years younger than him, but that's his aunt. Anyway, Aunt Elsie tutored me on all my algebra. She passed away this last October, but I was going to visit her until COVID. I couldn't go visit her for a while, but I would go visit her once a month, and I would spend about 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon there with her. And she always wanted to know where my algebra homework was. Well, look at me, I'm not in school, because she still thinks it's 1978 and I should have my algebra homework with me. Right? She lived in that home over 10 years. You want to know what paid for her to live in that home and be very well cared for there?
What's that?
Uncle Albert had a life insurance policy. When he died, that's what paid for it.
Yeah.
So don't knock an insurance contract. Now, after he died, she got all the death benefit, but she decided not to take it all at once. Pacific Life annuitized the payout. So not only did she get his death benefit, she got a rate of return on his death benefit, and it was still tax-free income to her. And when she ended up in a home, she got the income continued, and that paid for her long-term care.
Okay. Well, Kevin, we're getting close to 45 minutes or so into this arm wrestling match of what originally was looking into the risks associated with these installment sale trusts, and kind of turned into just this golden opportunity that folks have. I was wondering if maybe you could spend just a couple of brief seconds on all these different options that people have with DSTs, REITs, and ISTs, and really what the key differentiator is with your service and how somebody can find you.
Well, before we finish, I want to finish that thought you had a minute ago. My question is, what are the risks not using an installment sale trust?
That's fair. You're going to run out of money much faster.
The risks of not using one far exceed any perceived risks of using one. And the risk of using an installment sale trust are perceived risks. Mm-hmm. Is there risk to your principal? What are the odds of us losing your money the way we invest? Really low. What is the risk of us doing anything seedy with your money or stealing it or something like that? Well, there's dual signature and everything. How are we going to do that? I mean, there's all kinds of protections for you. There's no place you can take that money other than a CD down at the bank that is going to give you the protections you get by going through us. So it's a perception thing. It's not.
That's a key differentiator right there with your particular flavor of these.
So what are your other options? So let's say it's real estate and you're exiting real estate. If you want to go to a REIT, a real estate investment trust, you can 1031 to one of those. What happens is you're carrying over that lower basis for one. Okay.
So you're not addressing the tax problem at all. It's just being deferred.
You're not addressing the tax problem. You're kicking it down the road.
Okay.
Where we kick it down the road, and then over time we show you how we can actually wind it down over time. There's ways we can do that. Or we can kick it down the road forever and just earn money on the tax forever. There's a couple of ways we can handle that. With a REIT, you're moving into a REIT. Do those REITs appreciate? Some, but they're very highly leveraged generally. They have tremendous loads going into those REITs. And now the people running this REIT have to perform on every dollar you sent them, even though they're only getting about 82 cents of every dollar.
Yep.
Because they had to pay the securities broker dealer, they had to pay the broker themselves, they had to pay the advisor. There's usually 2 or 3 other fingers in the pie. They're going to lose 14 to 18% of that dollar before it even gets to them. Then they have to keep some of it in cash reserves. So how much are they deploying? 70 cents on the dollar. But they got to pay you interest on the whole dollar, even though they only got 70 cents on the dollar or maybe 82 cents on the dollar.
It doesn't sound like a very solid deal.
Well, in 2009 and 10 and 11, there were REITs that quit sending payments to people because they have a responsibility to stay solvent as a business. So if sending income to you, because they still had rent coming in, but they were having problems because of everything that happened in the markets, right? So all the unemployed people weren't paying rent, evictions, everything going on, people moving out, people doubling up, to save. Yep. I mean, it was a mess. There were a lot of these REITs, though, that had to quit sending payments to the investors, and you couldn't get out. To get out, somebody's got to get in. And there's a redemption fee, and these redemption fees are steep. So if you leave early, you got to pay the redemption fee. There were people that were at the end of their REIT. It was a 5-year thing. They were into the REIT. They still couldn't get out, and they couldn't get income. Because if the REIT starts letting people leave, the whole thing goes bankrupt and implodes, and everybody loses their money. So it's not wrong that they do that. That's what's in everybody's best interest. But it sucks if you're retired and you were depending on that income.
Sounds to me like it's worse than your worst nightmare as a homeowners association. At least there
Yeah.
you can sell your house. You're saying
Yeah.
in the REIT you can't. So
No.
okay, so that's good to know.
What they do, the REITs and the brochures talk about the good times. If you're in any investment for any length of time, you're going to go through one swing, right? How does it work out during the swing? Not well. It doesn't. Now, are there exceptions to that? Are there REITs out there that have done very well? Well, yes. But why? I mean, there's an alternative that has all kinds of other benefits, has equal income. Your money is not commingled with anybody else's money. See, in the installment sale trust, each one's a one-off. Your money's not commingled with anybody.
Okay.
You see, you don't have that problem, right?
Mhm.
Delaware Statutory Trust, DSTs. Those can end rather abruptly. Everybody's out. Everyone's very different. There's lots of varying terms. You have to do a lot of research on them. I've never sold one to a client. Most of them don't pay that well. Things can change as you're in it. I've had clients call me up and say, hey, the thing's closing and we have 90 days to choose where to put the money. Most of them have a standard term, right?
Mhm.
But they tend to be short term. And then what if that term doesn't line up to your financial plan? And now you got to look for someplace to put the money. What happens is people keep chasing these low returns and they keep making decisions to avoid tax. So they're buying something not because it was a good idea to buy it, a good investment. They're just trying to avoid the tax and earn something without taking the tax hit. And that's the problem with 1031. You have that short timeline, 180 days, you have 45 days to name a property. And you end up being pressured to buy something you might not have bought had you not had that artificial timeline that the tax code implies. So it alters your judgment. Next thing you're rushing to buy something, and maybe it's not financed the same way, and you still get a small tax hit, even though you didn't 1031 correctly. So, DSTs and REITs and all these things have all these other rules around them. And then your money's commingled sometimes and all those things. Other alternatives are like us. You have the Deferred Sales Trust, that group. They've got a mess of like 26 lawsuits against them right now for senior citizens where they lost the money that was in the trust. They have
They
a
didn't
bunch of
steal
stuff
it.
going
They just
on.
invested it poorly. Is that what happened?
Well, they did steal it by churning investments inside the trust for commissions to the advisor without the note holder's knowledge, because in their model, the note holder doesn't have the same controls over their collateral for their note.
Oh, so they didn't have dual signature requirements or any of that stuff that you're.
They
just
did
talking
if you
about.
knew to ask for it and you enforced it and demanded it, they would give it, but they wouldn't let you know up front that that was an option. Where we give that, every one of our trusts gets every possible provision you can have. It's written into this templated document.
Mhm.
Our documents are fill in the blank and go. Everybody gets all those benefits. Our clients get every benefit I would ask for, knowing everything I know if I was the client, without even knowing they need to ask for it, without their attorney knowing that it is even an option. It's just in there. Sometimes our clients have benefits they don't even know about because they didn't ask. And I didn't want to spend 3 hours explaining every single little nitty detail because they were ready to do it anyway. So it's all baked into ours because we decided to do business that way. These other programs, there's several of them out there. They don't want to give you something that you didn't negotiate for. And we don't believe we should have that kind of relationship with you, that you have to be clever enough to know to negotiate for something to get it. We just give it to you right up front. And that's how they got in trouble. And they used it as a profit center for themselves rather than acting in a fiduciary way. And now there's a securities broker dealer that's in a lot of trouble and a lot of trustees and people that are in a lot of trouble over there.
Interesting. Well, that seems like a good point to say, okay, so now we know why yours is worthy of consideration. And I believe it from what you've told me. How do people get in touch with you? What's your storefront look like?
For real estate, go to taxfreeyou.com.
Okay, and I'll put that in the memo section for our readers, for our listeners.
And then there's a little explainer video there that's like 2 minutes long, and then you can order more information right there. You can even download a PDF that explains a lot of things. You can order an illustration, say, okay, I have this building, it's worth this much, here's my basis. How does this work for me? And we'll even send you a free pro forma report. It takes us a couple of days to get it to you. But we need, it's a form where you answer 12 questions, and then you get this nice report back that outlines how it will work for you specifically, unique to you.
Okay. And I didn't hear you a charge for that. That's a free report. People just have to spend the time to fill out the data.
We don't get paid until you open a trust and fund it. We don't ask for anything in advance.
Of a business risk in this day and age?
It is. There are people I've spent a tremendous amount of time with and some money, and then they decided to do a 1031 because they just were in the religion of real estate and they didn't want to violate one of the dogmas.
So you really are, doing this exactly the way that you would set up business for yourself. It's just like there's no strings. It's come and take a look at everything that we do. Here's our agreements. Here's what we can do for you. And there's no shenanigans, is what it sounds like.
You're doing business right, you don't need them. Right?
It used to be like that. Now it's harder to find.
Our philosophy is if you stay a trust client for decades, that's better for us than just trying to get a wingding in year one. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And that's a more solid long-term business model than trying to because doing what some of these other folks have done, like the guy in Idaho or the other people out in Palm Springs and some other folks, look what's happened. I mean, they're all over Google and all over the court systems and everything else in all kinds of trouble. Mm-hmm. If they'd have just done the right thing, imagine what they would have and what their clients would have. So
you're talking about the people that set up an installment note and then borrowed all the money back in direct violation of IRS. Here's the red line that the IRS has, and they're just going to cross right over it. Yeah.
There's an advisor in the Bay Area there's a law firm there representing, I believe it's 13 or 16 people that used that monetized installment sale.
Yeah.
And several of them admitted that, my attorney told me it wouldn't fly, but I took a chance. So even some of these people, because of greed, I just want to get my hands on 92% of the money now. And rather than, because of the greed, they made a very poor judgment. Mm-hmm. Rather than thinking long-term, thinking generationally. What was my grandfather said? A rich man thinks for 3 generations. A poor man thinks of Saturday night.
Yep.
You see?
Well, that seems like a good area to wrap it up with. There's any other final comments on this installment sale and the way that Tax For You has put together this package?
It's fun. I've met some of the most interesting people that have become clients. I have one set of clients over here. They escaped. He was a colonel in the South Vietnamese army, and he escaped with his family on a boat and picked up other boats of refugees on the boat that he stole. And they escaped over to Indonesia. And at one point, they even had to fight off some pirates that were trying to take the Indonesian pirates trying to take the boat over.
This is a client.
And their life story should be made into a movie. I am not kidding you. They're the most lovely couple you ever met. And they have these strong accents and they're very clearly Vietnamese, and they wave the American. They're more patriotic than people have been here for 12 generations. They love America. Oh. And I've met business owners that had a business for 40 years, came here from India with literally $20 in his pocket, slept on a couch for 5 years at a friend's house until he could make enough money to start a business. And now he's selling a business for, high 7 figures. And we're helping him not lose 40% of the transaction, because after all those years, Sacramento and Washington wants, their share. Yep. And now, but he's thinking generationally, so he can have a fund there to have seed money to help his grandchildren start their own business. So I have met through doing this, I've met some of the most interesting people.
Oh, so
it's fun.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much for your time and experience in discussing this rather unique strategy. And I hope to be able to circle around with you in the future as I get questions on this video series. So once again, thank you very much.